BYEPOCALYPSE. It's week 14, and we've got every quarterback and every tight end ranked and tiered. So before Sunday, let's break down these updated rankings for week 14 of the 2024 NFL season. Welcome to E&M Fantasy Football, presented by ErvinandM.com, where I combine industry-leading data, Vegas sportsbooks, and expert analysis to provide you with optimal weekly rankings for the utmost accuracy when setting your weekly lineups in your fantasy football league. I'm running this on Thursday night for Friday's video. Expect more videos every week for the other unit groupings like wide receiver and running back. And click the playlist in the top right for all the updated rankings for week 14. We begin the rankings with quarterbacks, and there's no Ravens, no Broncos, Texans, Colts, Patriots, Commanders, Packers, or Lions. Sportsbooks have these quarterbacks projected to go for 270 yards or more. That's the highest amount this week. There's only two. Joey B, Joe Burrow, Joey 278 over under, 278 yards per game, 2.6 tutties per game, and he gets Dallas's 13th pass defense this week. Josh Allen, 270 over under, 253 yards per game. He scores 2.3 touchdowns per game and gets the league average Rams secondary this week in the highest scoring game. So they both have more than 2 tutties per game and have 2 of the remaining highest implied team totals for the week. Sans lines. They are your elite S-tier quarterbacks for week 14. A-tier is for the rest of the elite quarterbacks projected for about 260 total yards. Any of these guys can finish in the top 3. They all score about 2 touchdowns per game, and there's 4. We'll go back to back with Jalen Hurts and Baker, the touchdown maker, at 3 and 4. 240 over under for Jalen, 248 yards per game, 2.2 tutties per game, and he gets Carolina's 24th secondary. Baker, 243 over under, but 253 yards per game. He scores 2.3 tutties per game. He gets the league average Raiders. I mean, they are the only two other than Allen and Burrow that average over 2 tutties, while also boasting the next highest implied team totals of the week. The Eagles are 13-point favorites, putting them at nearly 30 implied points this week. Landslide victory, an absolute smash matchup thanks to Carolina's non-existent defense. And though Mayfield draws a better defense, the Raiders are still league average, and the Bucs will comfortably coast to victory as 7-point favorites in their own smash spot this week. All the remaining games are fairly close or have low or just okay totals. And to finish it out for A tier, we'll go back to back again with the next best outlooks with Kermit the Holmes and the throwing Samoan. Nearly 2 touchdowns per game for these two. They both also draw more difficult defenses than Baker and Jalen. Miami's total is better, and they are favored a bit more, but they draw the harsher secondary. So we'll give Mahomes the slight edge here against the 10th best LA pass D. These two, and these two truly stand above the rest and distinctly in their own little groups. You feel very good about these top 6. Don't worry, we have 7 more in the next tier before all hope is lost. B tier is projected for about 250 total yards. All these quarterbacks are solid this week. They score between 1 and 2 touchdowns per game. Like I said, there's 7 of these guys. So hopefully you're slotting them from the B tier or above. We'll kick it off with ErvinandM.com. ErvinandM.com is my company my best friend and I started in 2020. We literally make everything ourselves by hand. We have earrings, rings, necklaces, bracelets, tie clips, apparel, and more. Over a dozen curated gemstones and 100 handcrafted products. If you need a gift or something special for yourself, use the promo code in the description, find something you love, and buy it today. Now back to the video. If you like spending money and looking good, shop at my store, ervinm.com. But if you don't, subscribe. It's free. And I mean, this is pretty simple. It's got to be Sam Darnold at 7. 249 over-under, 246 yards per game. He's the only other quarterback this season to average 2 tutties per game. He draws Atlanta's 22nd below average back 7. And the Vikings are set for the next highest implied team total as the next heaviest favored team. Lock him in. And from here, the touchdown rates fall to 1 to 1.5, and the matchups have closer spreads and lower totals. But don't get it twisted. You still feel good slotting 8 through 13. Kyler Murray at 8. 247 over-under, 253 yards per game, 1.4 tutties per game. Cardinals are favored at home with a decent total. This one is a close game and could easily turn into a shootout against Geno and their heavy passing scheme. Seahawks are 12th against the pass, but half of Kyler's magic is more than his passing ability. Justin Herbert at 9, 249 over-under, 230 yards per game, 1.3 tutties per game. Herbert was not very impressive last week, but this week he gets a shot at redemption in a close game with KC and their below-average 23rd pass defense. This has the perfect game script for Herbert needing to really air the ball out if they are going to compete like sportsbooks project. And we'll go back-to-back with opposing quarterbacks for this game. Caleb Williams at 10 and Brock Purdy at 11. 256 over-under for Caleb, 246 over-under for Brock. I'm not going to lie. Brock's last game was worse than expected. Caleb's shown improvement over the past 2 weeks. While it's obvious Brock's shoulder is a glaring issue. Even though Caleb draws the tougher defense and are the underdogs in this one for fantasy, he gets the edge over Purdy in this one. The Bears' defense is no pushover either, and even though sportsbooks have faith in Purdy this week, you could easily see an improved but similar performance as last week. For what it's worth, the Niners are still favored at home by about 4 points. His line is good, so GL. Geno Smith at 12. 254 over-under, 289 yards per game. Only 1.3 tutties per game. Gets the league average Cardinals defense this week. And I'd be willing to bet that if they were at home instead of away in Arizona, they would be the slight favorites over the Cards instead of vice versa. Regardless, Geno, for better or worse, throws the ball more than virtually every starting quarterback this season. This should be a close game with the potential to climb higher than the total implies. And at 13, it's Pat Stafford. 253 over-under, 249 yards per game, 1.4 tutties per game. I mean, by all accounts, with the exception of his game against the Saints last week, he's been lights out. He finds himself a bit lower this week, though, given the tough 8th best Buffalo back 7. But never fear, they are at home. This is tied with the only other high-scoring game of the week. It's a close game, and it should be an absolute shootout. It's a must-win for LA. From here, it's your last chance of actual viability. Sportsbooks have this group projected for only about 240 yards this week, and there's only 4. They have high upside, but they are inherently risky. And we'll kick it off with opposing quarterbacks in their matchup this week in Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson at 14 and Jameis Winston at 15. Russell Wilson, 231 over-under, 271 yards per game. He throws the next most touchdowns at 1.8 and has averaged a ton of yards, albeit through less games. He gets a great matchup against the below average Browns secondary, and I mean, they are 7-point favorites in this one. The total is
Diarrhea.
but the spread still allows Pittsburgh for a respectable implied team total. For Jameis, it's a 255 over-under, 336 yards per game across his past 5 games. Only 1.2 tutties. But I mean, Jameis is truly a wild card. No one has higher upside with a lower floor starting in the league right now. The negative game script and below average Steelers pass defense will allow Jameis to embrace his inner gunslinger and let the bombs fly as they play from behind in one of the toughest stadiums in the league. If he can keep it clean, it could be a very, very entertaining game. Kirk Cousins is 16. Kirko Chains, 248 over under, 254 yards per game, and 1.4 tutties. I mean, it feels bad to have Kirk so low, especially with his matchup being so enticing against the Vikings back 7. Like we mentioned with Darnold, this is a landslide victory for Minnesota at home, and the possibility of him throwing an interception, being pressured, being sacked is all but guaranteed against this defense. Depending on how your league's scoring is set up, this could be a long day for Cousins, in spite of it being a very important game for Atlanta. We'll go Cooper Rush at 17. I mean, I can't believe we're even talking about him. It's a 235 over-under and 265 yards per game in his only 3 full starts this season. He's averaged 1.3 tutties. Vegas has him doing just enough not to fall into the tier below, and it has absolutely everything to do with his opponent's defense. The worst defense in the league in terms of points allowed, not named Carolina, the Bengals. And this is truly your last-ditch effort. These quarterbacks are projected for about 220 total yards. They're barely justifiable. It's the D tier. If you're starting any of these guys, let me know down in the comments why. Will Levis at 18. 229 over-under for Mayo Boy. He leads the 5th lowest scoring offense against the worst secondary in the league. It's a matchup that even Vegas has Levis about 30 yards over average for this contest. This is a shot in the dark. Terrible total. I mean, it's like the Army versus the Navy. AOC at 19. Look at his disgusting mustache. Good Lord. 229 over-under. AOC gets the exact same story. He draws the 3rd worst secondary in the league in Tampa as the 6th lowest scoring offense. He also gets the 30-yard boost like Levis for this matchup, but don't get it twisted. The game was over before it started. For fantasy, he's just viable enough, all things considered, not to be dead last. But it gets worse. Aaron Rodgers at 20. 228 over-under, 219 yards per game. They are the 7th lowest scoring offense in the league, facing the 9th best secondary in a blowout game. It's hopeless. 228 is better than the next guy, so I guess that's something. Sorry, Derek Carr at 21. Only 217 yards over-under this week. I mean, Carr's 19th for passing yards. His projection is abysmal. The total is abysmal. The matchup is abysmal. Giants are 6th best against the pass. The Saints are in New York, but are favored, albeit with the next lowest total of the week. It is a must-win for the Saints, but this game's going to make your eyes bleed. But from here, it's RIP. It's less than 200 yards. They're unstartable. It's the rest. And this breaks my heart. Bryce Young's matchup is just too devastating to overcome. Not good. Drew Lock, Mac Jones, it doesn't matter. Anybody that's left, you know what I'm saying? That's your top quarterbacks. Let's do the tight ends. Keep in mind, there's no Ravens, no Broncos, Texans, Colts, Patriots, Commanders, Packers, or Lions. The S tier begins with some seriously impressive numbers for the tight end position. It's 60 to 70 yards or more. And there's 3. Brock Bowers, 70 over under, 74 yards per game. He scores a tutty 30% of the time, and he faces Tampa, who allows 80% of tight ends to put in that work. George Kittle, 55 over under, 65 yards per game, and he scores a tutty 80% of the time. He gets Chicago's defense, who allows 80% of tight ends to get home. Woo! Trey McBride, 70 over under, 71 yards per game. He does not have a good touchdown rate at only 10%, and he faces the Seahawks, who stop 1/3 of the tight ends that they face. But it doesn't matter, because he's an absolute freak monster. These 3 tight ends truly stand alone. They are your elite S-tier tight ends, undisputed. The A tier is for the rest of the tight end ones, projected for about 50 to 60 receiving yards. Any of these guys can finish top 4. There's only 2, so we'll keep it brief. And welcome to the lineup. Jonnu Smith. Round of applause for Jonnu Smith, everyone. Well done. 50 over under, 54 yards per game. He scores a tutty 30% of the time. And he faces the Jets, who allow 80% of tight ends to put in that work. Hallelujah. Lock him in. And Travis Kelce, 57 over under, 53 yards per game. He scores a tutty 20% of the time. And he gets the Chargers, who allow 70% to get home. Not bad. Not bad. Taylor Swift approves. The B tier. We are still in tight end 1 territory. If you've got any of these guys or above, you feel good. They are projected for 40 to 50 yards. David Njoku at 6. 45 over under, 44 yards per game. He scores a tutty 40% of the time, and he faces Pittsburgh, who allows 80% to get home. He's got the best tutty rate out of the remaining tight ends. His matchup is great considering the defense, and not for a second are you sitting him or the other 3 left in the top 9. Hallelujah. It's Cade Otton at 7. 45 over under, 42 yards per game. He scores a tutty 30% of the time. He does draw a poopy matchup with the Raiders, 66% allowance rate for tight ends. I mean, it's the next roughest matchup, but you could argue it simply won't matter with Cade and Baker. And I agree, obviously. They are going to boat race the Raiders, and Otton's going to be right in there. TJ Hawkinson at 8, 37 over under, but 51 yards per game. No tutties. Very sad, very unfortunate. Hawkinson hasn't scored a tutty this season. His average has become extremely good, though, and his matchup is just as good as the others. 80% allowance rate for Atlanta against opposing tight ends. He's the biggest positive regression candidate for a tutty for the Vikings, so don't be scared. And it's Evan Ingram at 9. 43 over under, 41 yards per game. This is where it gets dicey. He's more talented than the others below, and it's just enough to keep him out of the C tier. His matchup is really great in terms of fantasy against Tennessee's 90% allowing tight ends to get home. But in real life, this game is a disaster, so it could truly leave him with a basement level floor. GL. But we've arrived at the mid-lords. If you have anyone here, I'm sorry. It's your last viable anything. It's 30 to 35 yards. And a prayer. Will Dissly at 10. 35 over under, 33 yards per game. He's got the best outlook over the others by a long shot. KC allows 90% of tight ends to get home. but Disley is as vanilla as it gets. He's a safe, modest amount of expected points. Noah Gray at 11. 30 over under, 31 yards per game, and he scores a tutty 30% of the time. He's slowly made it into the actual viability tiers. That being said, his outlook was about 20% worse than Disley's, but it is worth noting that he scores a tutty 20% more often, and at a rate of 30%, it's respectable, and it adds up for points. So, not the worst. Not the worst. We'll go back to back to back with the next three very similar lines in data and opponents in terms of tight ends. It's Kyle Pitts. It's Cole Kmet and Juwan Johnson at 12, 13, and 14. They all have about 30 yards per game and 30-yard lines, while scoring a tutty about 26% of the time. The glaring issue for these last viable options is the fact that they have the worst matchup out of the top 12. The defenses that the three of them face have stopped 50% of opposing tight ends this season. That is devastating. Couple that with their lines and averages, and it's GL. But from here, it's RIP. It's 20 yards or less. It's the rest. Pat Fryermuth, Dawson Knox, Mike Gesicki, Chigan Quanquo, Noah Fant, Conklin, it doesn't matter. They all go there. I'll throw your quarterbacks and tight ends full screen back on screen now. Leave your questions below, and I sincerely hope this helps everyone watching. It's been an amazing season. Thank you all for your time. All the rankings and news for Week 14 will be in the playlist in the top right of the screen. Make sure to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you can see all the videos each week before submitting your lineups. It's free, so it's a good value. But if you like looking good and spending money, spend it in my store and watch some more videos.